welcome to the NewsX Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Well, today I have with me a very special guest. I'm joined by Vikram Sampath, an historian, and he's actually come out with his latest book. It's a book on Veer Savarkar, A Contested Legacy. This is actually the second volume of books on Vinayak Damodar Savarkar. So I'm going to begin first of all, Vikram. Congratulations on your book. I read it and it's amazing. You've actually someone like me who doesn't have much of an interest, didn't know much about Veer Savarkar. I've learned a lot. So I think you've done a very special service over here with this book and told it in a very nice manner. It's not preaching, it's not trying to prove an agenda or a point. I think you've really articulated it well. It's written simply. You've given all sides, and let us really make our minds. So,
thank you.
I really congratulate you on that effort also.
Thank you so much. I think that's a very important thing for a historian, according to me, to not become judgmental about characters of the past. I think, present all the facts, illuminate the records, as I always say, and let the discerning reader make up her mind. Because I don't think as a historian, we need to sit in judgment. We just have the luxury of retrospective view of seeing what they could have or should have done and so on. But, in the circumstance, it's difficult to see what they should have done. So it's best to stay away from judgments.
Fair enough, which is very difficult in today's world of social media where you get snap judgments.
True.
I've I've seen your timeline, and when I posted about reading your book, I got a lot of people also reacting to it. And the point that got a lot of reactions is an issue that I want you to address is the issue of mercy petitions. People have given me a list of so many others in the Andaman Cellular Jail who spent more time than Vinayak Savarkar, but did not ask for a mercy petition. Yeah. Now, I know you've explained his reasons for why he did that, but can you just explain that again for our viewers?
Sure, Priya. I think that's usually the stick that they beat Savarkar all the time with. Now, the idea of the mercy, I don't even call it a mercy petition. It's a petition because nowhere, in fact, in the first volume, I've included all the petitions. He signed about 7 or 8 petitions, which was a very legal, provision that was provided to all political prisoners. It was not something exclusively given only to him. So there were several others, Barin Ghosh, there was Sachindranath Sanyal. Now, these were all the leaders of the revolutionary movement. So they were given the right to file a petition, and most of them, they didn't file it for themselves. They filed it for all the others also. Like for instance, Savarkar in his 1917 petition, he says, if my name constitutes an obstacle in the release of all the other prisoners, please release the others and omit my name. And that will give me as much pleasure as my own release would, give. So very clearly, these people who were acting as spokespersons for all the other prisoners, most of them were young men in their late teens, early 20s, unlettered. They'd gone into the revolution. About 100 odd prisoners were there in the cellular jail, many of them from Bengal, most of them, a few from Maharashtra and Punjab and Tamil Nadu and other places. So they were all not, conversant with English law, English language. So these people, including Savarkar, would file these petitions, arguing for a case for all of them, saying, can you define our rights? Are we a political prisoner or are we a common convict? And either case, you need to define what concessions we will get according to the law. We talk so much about human rights. So the kind of, inhuman conditions in which they were subjected to in the cellular jail, not even the basic amenities of good food, a toilet facility or medical facility, and the tortures, the flogging, the koluka bell that they had to do all day, to extract oil in the blazing sun. All this was given to them, which political prisoners in any other colony in the world would not have probably endured. So he was arguing on that basis. And in fact, some of the senior members of the Home Department of the Government of India, including one Home member called Sir Reginald Craddock, he comes to Port Blair. He interviews Savarkar and other people. And in his official jottings, he says that I spoke to Savarkar and he shows no remorse or apology for whatever he did. So this was, and why would a British officer actually note this in an official noting? If that was not what was the case, he could have fallen at his feet and said, please let me out. I'll, subscribe to whatever you say. So I think it's very, very disingenuous to keep bringing this up. Most of the other prisoners were automatically being let out under a general amnesty, a royal proclamation of Emperor George V, immediately after the Delhi Darbar, and also during the interim years of the First World War. It's only these big leaders who are not being released, including Savarkar, who was released almost 14 years later. From 1910 to 1924, he endured very, very hard times in jail. So I think it needs to be seen in this context and not the same thing that we flog all the time. That way, Gandhiji actually wrote a petition on behalf of the Savarkar brothers, saying they are young men, they're very brave, they fought a lot for the country. Now there is a constitutional reforms process with the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. So they want to get into the mainstream now. So why don't you let them do? They want to join the Congress, which he thought was the mainstream. So today we talk about, Naxals and terrorists and all of them who are joining mainstream politics and electoral politics also. And we actually welcome that. So similar procedure was being followed then. And nowhere, even in the petitions, does he say, I'm sorry for what I did and so on. It's not an apology. People take up this one line, I beg to remain your most obedient slave or whatever. But that was a template of the time. That's how people wrote. Even Gandhiji's letters ended like that, or Subhash Chandra Bose's letters ended like that. It had nothing to do with meaning what they said.
You're saying it was a tactical ploy rather than,
Yes.
this was the format needed to get out of jail, and so he could do, good otherwise in terms of, the freedom struggle other than sitting in jail.
Yes, and a lot of them, Priya, did that. I mean, Sachindranath Sanyal, one of his colleagues, he writes in his autobiography, Mera Bandi Jeevan, that I wrote a petition very similar to what Savarkar did, but I was released, but he and his brother was not. Both the Savarkar brothers were in cellular jail, and he also rationalizes why by saying that, the British considered him as a D category or a dangerous category criminal. So releasing him would reignite the revolutionary zeal in the Bombay presidency, which had fizzled out. So including Sachindranath Sanyal or Savarkar, they would give this undertaking that we will stay away from politics, we will not say anything against the government, etc. Just get out and then do what they wanted to do. Sachindranath Sanyal went on to form the HRA, and he got involved in the Kakori case later as the leader of that revolutionary group. So similarly with Savarkar as well. So even the British did not trust these petitions. They were not even worth the paper they were written on, because they were empty promises being made. And mind you, Savarkar was given 2 life imprisonments of 25 plus 25, 50 long years. So 1910, he was imprisoned when he was about 26 or 27. He would have come out of jail in 1960. And usually that collar tag would be put to him all the time with the, number 1960 written on it, so that every day he sees it and knows that this is when I'm going to get out of this hellhole. So in such a case, as you rightly said, there was no point of rotting in jail. You could do a lot more for the country by coming out. Of course, people argue, but Bhagat Singh did not file a petition and so on. But that was a different case. The prisoner cannot choose his punishment. Many of them were executed. Savarkar was, like several others, were put to life imprisonment. In such a case, nothing is achieved either personally or for the nation by just being in jail. So you'd rather get out and do something constructive.
The other 2 issues that I want to talk to you about is what I found very interesting is, of course, the trial. And that really reads in a very racy manner. Also, it reads very well. Also, and you quote Sardar Patel in that, saying that he may get the legal, victory. He may get a legal way out, but morally he will always be held accountable. And that's, as you said, is exactly what is the state now. He's still not been given a moral clean chit.
That's unfortunate that so many times this case of the Gandhi murder, in which he was implicated, only on the basis of the statement of a police approver, Digambar Badge, who made that famous statement that Badge, along with Nathuram Godse and Narayan Apte, went to Savarkar's house. And he said this famous statement that Yashasvi hoon ya in Marathi, or, be successful and come back. But there was no corroborative evidence of that at all. In fact, his assistant Gajanan Damle and bodyguard Appa Kasar, whom the police again coerced to give a statement that, they were witnesses to this dialogue between the trio. They also, they were not called to testify in the Red Fort trial in Delhi, very curiously. And decades later, even the Kapoor Commission, which was set up to reinvestigate the case in some way, even the Kapoor Commission, which called about 101 witnesses, did not call Damle and Appa Kasar, on whose testimony, the approver statement were actually, being verified. So it's very, very curious. And in fact, as late as 3 years ago, and I think a lot of mainstream media probably missed out on this, that there was a PIL that was filed by, a very ardent Savarkarite called Dr. Pankaj Phadnis in the Bombay High Court. It was then dismissed there. Then he went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually got an amicus curiae set up for 1 whole year to go through all the documents of the trial court, Justice Atmacharan's, verdict that was given in 1949, and also the Kapoor Commission reports. They went through all the witnesses, testimonies, and everything. And none less than the former CJI of India, Justice Bobde and Justice Nageshwar Rao, then finally gave out a verdict saying the petitioner's claim that the Kapoor Commission actually indicts Savarkar is completely misplaced. He was honorably exonerated by the trial court in 1949, and that stays because a commission's report cannot overturn the verdict of a trial court. And the Kapoor Commission report also died a natural death. There was no action taken report on it. It was not even tabled in Parliament. So its findings also actually went rather unnoticed. But then, as you rightly said, every time there is a moral stick to beat Savarkar with, especially in contemporary times, for contemporary politics of Congress versus BJP versus all these parties, then they keep bringing this up, saying, he was the assassin of Gandhi. That way, if one actually does, time and again, members of the Congress keep saying the RSS was behind Gandhi's murder. That on the one hand, they quote the Kapoor Commission report to say Savarkar was implicated, but the same Kapoor Commission also unequivocally said that the RSS had no hand in Gandhi's murder at all. Despite that, about 20,000 RSS workers across the nation were put in jail for several months, including children, women. What role would they have in, a conspiracy, which even if some members of their group had hatched, hypothetically assuming, to actually put innocent people for months on end, 6 months, 8 months, with no charges put on them, the organization being banned, association with that considered to be, a pariah thing. So this was what the organization also dealt with. So why don't we accept the Kapoor Commission's report then in toto, which also gave a complete clean chit to the RSS, but we use that also to beat, the RSS. At the same time, we use the same commission report to beat Savarkar also. So there's a lot of logical fallacy in the way argument.
Who said politics is logical?
I know.
But it's not just the fact that they had a hand in actually carrying out or planning the murder, but it's also the ideology that led to a Nathuram Godse and an Apte to, move against Gandhi. So the ideological differences between Savarkar and Gandhi, between the right wing and Gandhi's teachings, you dwelt on that in your book also. In fact, you begin by telling us how it all started. So a bit on that.
Yeah. That is a very pertinent question, because I think Gandhi and Savarkar have always maintained are the two opposite poles of Indian history, and the two shall never reconcile. They had very, very fundamental differences on what constitutes nationhood, what constitutes, on caste amelioration, on the vexed problem of Hindu-Muslim unity and all of that, and how different communities need to be treated on every possible issue. And these differences came about right from the time they met as young men in London. There's that famous anecdote where Savarkar is cooking prawns in the India House in London, and Gandhi meets him there for the first time, and Savarkar offers him prawns to eat. Gandhi, being a staunch vegetarian, says, no, I can't eat this. And Savarkar says, we are looking for people who should eat the British alive, and you can't even eat boiled fish, then how do you plan to work with us? So the differences were there right from there, and also their approach to freedom struggle itself. One believed in an armed, conflict. Another believed in a non-violent struggle. So the twain would never meet. But then time and again, including, during the trial, I've also mentioned in the book that one of his associates tells him while he was in Ratnagiri, this is in the 1930s, that what would happen if Gandhi gets assassinated or something, or should we do that? And Savarkar actually admonishes him and says, we are not to assassinate one of our own. He's an Indian, he's a leader, he's someone who's leading a mass movement. We may have ideological differences with him, but then we are not, our assassination strategy is only against the British. And this was also, the stand of the Abhinav Bharat that Savarkar formed, where in the early 1900s, there was a lot of suspicion that Gopal Krishna Gokhale was acting as a spy for the British, and he was giving out a lot of secrets of the revolutionaries over to the British. So when he comes to London, a lot of these revolutionaries had planned to bump him off. And that time too, Savarkar admonishes them, saying he's a very tall leader of the country, so don't even dream to do such things. All our bullets are reserved only for the British oppressors. So this was a stand all through the 30s and 40s. So there's nothing wrong in having an ideological opposition to someone, but that doesn't necessarily always translate to murder.
Assassinate the ideology, but not the man. You very rightly call it Savarkar a contested legacy. There's a lot that is, so quickly. First, I wanted to finish, take off from where we left off. The differences between Gandhi and Savarkar, and also I wanted to talk about the difference between Gandhi and Ambedkar on caste.
Yeah, I think that's also an aspect we seldom, touch upon, that Savarkar and Ambedkar, when it came to their, views on caste, there was a lot more in consonance than between Gandhi and Ambedkar. And Ambedkar also writes, and I quote it in the book, he writes to Savarkar saying, you're the only one who's understood that the Varna system is at the root cause of this whole Jativad and casteism, and the removal of the Varna is what is important. And at the same time, Gandhi was going on a complete different tangent, saying, I believe in the Varna system. I don't consider it to be odious, and shaking up the Varna system would lead to a collapse of Hinduism as a whole, and so on. So I think both Savarkar and Ambedkar, in my view, were nihilists. They were looking at dismantling the system completely and shaking up the social structure. Whereas Gandhi understood that in a society like ours, it's very tough to do this. And we are a very traditional orthodox society. So reforms have to come piecemeal. They have to come step by step. So eradication of untouchability was his priority. But for Savarkar, as also an Ambedkar, everything had to go very quickly. We would, very few, Priya, would associate the father of Hindutva, which is today's parlance, associated with Manuvad and upper caste hegemony and all of that, to actually being an advocate for earth-shattering social reforms, which looked at a completely casteless society. First intercaste, dining cafe in Ratnagiri, the first intercaste, temple where people of all castes could enter, the Patit Pavan Mandir there, schools for, children of all communities, including the so-called untouchables who could sit with the other castes and study. This kind of intercaste marriage and all of this that was propounded by someone in the 1920s, probably a few years even before Ambedkar went so full throttle into social reforms. But we don't give credit to him for that, sadly.
That is true. No, that was the fact that also the interesting thing that Gandhiji still actually he wanted, as you said, to eradicate untouchability, but he said the caste system still is good and people should stick to, working do their jobs according to the caste that they are born in. That's
and his famous statement that everybody cannot, when a group of untouchables go to meet him, he says everybody cannot aspire to become a prime minister or a viceroy. You need to be born in a particular family to have the leadership genes. That today in India, we are
in the first seeds of dynasty was sown then.
Yes, where anyone, a chaiwala, can become a prime minister. So I think there is a fundamental difference there somewhere.
What made you choose this topic? Because I was, Savarkar is maybe he's an icon of the Hindu right, but even then beyond Maharashtra, I don't see much resonance except maybe in times of elections when the Congress picks him up and the BJP is obliged to defend him. But apart from that, does he have any value beyond Maharashtra and
I think to a great extent, the India of today that is fructifying, even though whether his proponents or his opponents don't give him the due, is Savarkar's vision of it, particularly on issues today of national security, of defense. I mean, his philosophy was always, the book he wrote also was Shatruncha Shibirat, go into the enemy camp and beat them where it hurts the most. I think after Balakot and what happened there, India is now willing, and even, in terms of China, our stand on China, on a lot of these aspects, Savarkar's vision is what, in my view, is fructifying. So in terms of relevance, it is extremely relevant. His views, as I said, he was the father of Hindutva, an ideology that is in political ascendant across India today. So to understand what were the causes, what were the motivations behind this ideology, and what did the person who advocated it stand for, whether it came to issues of national security, foreign relations, social order, and all of that, and nationalism, which these are all very, very, burning issues today. And so his views as the founder of Hindutva and a very important political ideologue, I think, becomes very important. As I said, he's become such a political untouchable. Sadly, somebody who advocated a casteless society and against untouchability becomes a political untouchable, where anybody who picked up this subject had to pay a very heavy price for it, all through from post-independence. And I think Nehru had such an antipathy for him that anybody who was even vaguely associated with him, would pay a very heavy price. I've mentioned several times about how Hridaynath Mangeshkar ji actually lost his job in the All India Radio only because he tuned some of Savarkar's poems in Marathi. He was a prolific poet. For that crime, he was actually, sacked from All India Radio. So much for, intolerance after 2014, etc. The seeds of intolerance also were sown long back, where you don't toe the government line, you can't. So that kind of a persona non grata that he had become. So today, at least, there is an environment, Priya, where we are able to have this mainstream discussion about a man like this, and a book can be written about him. There can be discussions, which this cancel culture, I think, is antithetical to democracy. You may hate someone, you may love someone, but blocking even a discussion about that person, I think that goes against the very basic tenets of democracy and dissent. Where in Europe, every year we have several books written even on a Hitler. Even if you want to castigate the person, please do some research, please do some intellectual work rather than base it on rhetoric and contemporary politics. So that's what fascinated me, to pick him up, because he had been so underrepresented, so under-evaluated. And I picked up so many things about him, which I never knew, even though I was a historian earlier, that he was a revolutionary. We usually associate Marxism with both revolution as well as social reforms. Whereas here was a Hindutva ideologue who was India's first organizer of a secret society, who did so much of revolutionary work, who advocated a casteless society, which would be very difficult to reconcile in today's political rhetoric.
Yes, today you have the BJP giving reservations on caste, and as you said, doing a whole lot of things that the founder was not really into. Also, the fact that he was an atheist, a meat-eating, that goes against the image of the RSS, or what they are led to believe, is that he is someone they keep in a secret cupboard, really, rather than hanging out, outside. And I don't hear his name in election speeches apart from, when they have to rebut the Congress, really.
Yeah, true. And so we have someone who's very, very progressive, stood for science and technology.
So Golwalkar gets more play than Savarkar, which is, I think, very sad in a way.
No, but there's a reason also, perhaps, Priya, that Savarkar was never part of the RSS. So he was always, the Hindu Mahasabha, and the Hindu Mahasabha and RSS were different organizations. And under Golwalkar, there were lots of differences of opinion between the two.
Coming from the same ocean of thought, really. So.
Yeah, and the Hindu Mahasabha tried to take over the RSS as a Boy Scouts, which Golwalkar resisted completely. And so that's why, though they were linked in the larger Saffron Brotherhood, I think the Hindu Mahasabha and RSS had their own set of differences. They were not one organization.
I think we're out of time, but before I let you go, what next are you working on? Because I know there is a lot of curiosity, and that's from a personal point of view also I'd like to know.
Yeah, so I think I'm a big sucker for punishments, and so I'm looking at two more landmines which blow in the face of historians today: biographies of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and Tipu Sultan, both of whom again are very, very contemporary, though they are in the 16th and 17th centuries, 18th century.
But very relevant, yeah.
Very relevant in politics today in Karnataka, in Maharashtra, and on a pan-India level. So I think there is a need for historians and for the society to reevaluate these characters of the past time and again through a modern lens, through new records that could be unearthed. And that's how the discipline, what is written in the past, is not fossilized. There's a constant reevaluation, a constant rewriting of history, which is not a bad thing at all.
I want to ask you, is this also a course correction, so to say? Because, because of the Congress rule and the left liberal rule, we've had one version of history. Now we are seeing a whole lot of other names come up, and names that had been earlier ignored. And, one can say you're also doing I know in your timeline, you've been accused of whitewashing Savarkar, for instance, to which I would tell them, read the book. But beyond that, do you think there is also a subtle course correction happening, and you're part of that, knowingly or unknowingly?
Well, there is always, wouldn't call course correction. There are multiple, there's one truth, but there are multiple narratives to that truth. The sad part in India is that in a discipline like history, which thrives on these multiple narratives, dissent, discussion, debate, all alternative versions have been, ruthlessly and systematically suppressed. There's been only one hegemonic government view, a Marxist historiography that has ruled the roost, which looks at India and Indian history in a very, very narrow prism, looking at it through casteist lenses, or looking at it where we are a country of losers. We have nothing to be proud of, of our past. Everything about our past is something that we have to be very apologetic about. So while there's a very thin line between jingoism, revisionism, chauvinism, and so on, but then telling the truth of our own past, the truth as I see it, or as historians would see it, in a way that also interests, inspires and excites the future generation. I think that's very important. And world over, history is a subject that is constantly under revision. A famous historian had said all historical works are interim reports. So there's nothing final about it. We are just constantly revising it. And in India, it's not happened so far. So now, luckily, though the government is sadly not doing much about this in an official capacity, though now there are slowly steps towards rewriting history textbooks and so on, which have been the same for so many years. I think a lot of individual private efforts, including mine, have gone a very small, humble way to kind of bring to the reader's attention several of these facts. As you rightly said, any reader who reads a researched book like this can easily see that all these slurs and slanders, that this is whitewashing and all of that, they would not have a leg to stand, because if it was really whitewashing, then please come up with a counter book with more facts. I think as Atalji had said once, the counter to a book is another book. So if somebody can do double the amount of research and refute all the facts that I present to it, that's most welcome, because that's what history offers. You can rubbish away the best researched account, the best written account, with double the amount of work that the original author has done.
There you have it, the challenge. But thank you, Vikram, for speaking to us and for bringing in such a great book. And we look forward to your next book. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priya. A great pleasure talking to you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.